This is the clip of her finding out that she won, and I think she just looks pretty stunned. We also have video that I want to play a little bit later, which shows just how adept of a candidate she is. But let's watch this first in terms of appreciating the energy that this is bringing to the Democratic Party.
She's right here. I can't let you. She's looking at herself on television right now. How are you feeling?
Pause it for 1 second. Understand, she's not just looking at herself on television. She's looking at the fact that she beat Joe Crowley by something like 15 points. I mean, this was a whooping. A whooping.
She's right here. I can't let you. She's looking at herself on television right now. How are you feeling? Can you put it into words?
Nope. I cannot put this into words.
All right, your supporters here are very excited for you. This was a grassroots campaign. Can you believe the numbers that you're seeing right now?
I cannot believe these numbers right now, but I do know that every single person here has worked their butt off to change the future of the Bronx and Queens. That's what I know. That's what I know. And that this victory belongs to every single grassroots organizer, every working parent, every mom, every member of the LGBTQ community. Every single person is responsible for this.
Hell yeah.
I mean, that's, talk about expositional, sort of on message and enthusiastic. That's pretty amazing.
I'm going to say it again. Hell yeah.
Very exciting stuff. And let's see, did this print out? I had a printout of her. Oh, yeah, here it is. Here is her platform as she was handing out. Medicare for all, medicine, vision, dental, mental health care. Universal jobs guarantee, serve our communities with living wages. Fully funded public schools and universities, plus taxing Wall Street to support tuition-free public universities and trade schools. Paid family and sick leave. Housing is a human right, safe, secure, habitable, and affordable homes, justice system reform, end the war on drugs, demilitarize police, abolish for-profit incarceration, immigration justice, protect dreamers and TPS recipients. That's those folks we have now deported who were here in the event like the Haitian earthquake or a civil war. Simplify the paths to citizenship and abolish ICE. Infrastructure overhaul. Invest 100% renewable green industry. Clean campaign finance, ending the corrupting influence of corporate finance in public elections, an economy of peace that supports our veterans, actively values all humanity. That was her printed platform that she was handing out to folks. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, lots of reason to be happy today. Also, I would say probably in terms of just material benefits, more reason to be upset. But let's start with the happy news, because there's always the chance that this could be indicative of things to come, and also that it sends a message to Democratic lawmakers about where the future of the party lies. And I mean, there's a couple aspects of this win in New York 14th. So we should say, primaries last night in New York, in Colorado, in Maryland. I believe that's it. There may be one other state that I'm forgetting in terms of Democratic primaries. And we should say the one in New York, it was only for federal seats. The New York voting system is so effed up and such an incumbent protection racket that there's just a myriad of ways in which they make it difficult to vote, whether it's you need to register months and months in advance for a specific party, whether you have no sort of, there's no early voting process. The absentee voting thing is rather cumbersome and difficult. All that. And this, we're going to separate the primaries. So instead of like having primaries for House and the governorship and your state reps and whatnot all on the same day. We're going to separate them by months. So that even to the point of confusion where I was like, I had forgotten that. And when I looked at my ballot, I'm like, wait a second. Oh, that's right. I forgot. So the biggest outcome, or I should say it's a huge upset. And it is not necessarily, we saw a little bit of this. Certainly there was establishment candidates, one's backed by the deep CCC, one's backed by Emily's List, or ones that were not backed by Emily's List. There's clearly an energy in the base of the Democratic Party that is pushing back. And in some places it broke through, in other places it did not.
And beyond the base, right? Like people who don't usually vote.
Well, I guess it depends on how you want to define what the base of the Democratic Party is. But certainly, and I don't know the participation numbers. As far as I can tell, it's pretty, there's no apples to apples version of figuring out what the primary results were in Ocasio-Cortez versus Crowley's race, because Crowley hasn't had a primary, hasn't had to run a primary, as far as I can tell, for at least for two cycles at least. And so, but the numbers seem relatively high, although they're low, right? What was it? I don't know. 30,000 people voted in a district. Maybe you had 10% of the Democrats came out. That's not extraordinary numbers, but again, that's by design. And usually that favors the incumbent, right? Because the incumbent has all the resources, and the incumbent has the ability to raise more money. And when you're talking about such low attendance primaries, low participation primaries, those type of advantages have an outsized impact. It sort of worked the opposite way in this instance, because you had really, an exceptional candidate. In general, we don't get that involved in primaries on this program. At least not for a congressional district, because there's just too many. But she's come up on the program multiple times just because she's been such a particularly outstanding candidate. Whether or not she was running against the fourth most powerful Democrat and arguably the heir to the speakership of Nancy Pelosi's.
That might be the best part.
Well, in terms
there's
of
a lot of best parts, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of good parts of this, and they're all going to have, and how much of an implication they have. Like, look, they all could resonate. Let's start with the most tangible part. You have a 28-year-old, and she's all but sure to win the general election because of the nature of this seat. A 28-year-old activist who has amazing politics, who raised something like 70% of her dollars, and there wasn't that many, $300,000 I think she raised, was small donations, tiny donations. This versus Crowley, who got $1.5 million, 5 times more money than she did. And it was from some of the biggest names in the country. A year ago, she was tending bar in 2017. Less than a year ago, November, right? That's 8 months ago. And, but more important than that, she is an amazing candidate. Her politics are all exceptional. She will be. I don't know. I don't know I don't know enough about every single member of the House. We're talking, 400 plus people. But I think she's going to be the most outspoken in terms of things like Palestinian rights. She is going to be, she won't be the first. I guess Mark Pocan has already come out with a bill to abolish ICE. But she's going to be the second or third. I mean, who knows? Hopefully by then there'll be more. But things like health care, I mean, across the board. I don't think that there's anybody who would have an issue with her politics and with her positions. Maybe some may have some. And she also is very articulate about the idea of separating race from economic issues or separating economic issues from race. She has a very strong grasp on how those things are interrelated.
And not for nothing, she's out as a Democratic Socialist.
And she's out as a Democratic Socialist.
Which is amazing and, huge for the DSA, which endorsed her.
It's
at the
huge
convention.
for the DSA. It's very helpful to folks like Zephyr Teachout and Cynthia Nixon, who endorsed her. There's a lot of implications to this.
Gillibrand's feeling that.
Yeah, I bet. And so the other issue is going to be how much of a warning shot is this? Because look, people are making comparisons between when David Bratt knocked off David Cantor and Eric Cantor. And the difference between that and this is Eric Cantor did not think it was possible. Crowley certainly had forewarning. There's a reason why he spent $1.5 million. He saw this coming, and he could not stop it. In addition to that, and Brendan had made this point earlier, there's, I think, been one incumbent who has lost their election in terms of Democrats since 2016. In terms of Republicans, this happens a lot. You just don't see this on the Democratic side. And so, and we had another race, can't remember what district it was in New York off the top of my head, where we had another incumbent who nearly lost, I think to first generation refugee. But she seems to have pulled it out.
Yeah, in the 9th against, that's my district, against Bunk, I can't pronounce his last name. But yeah, she was close too. And I voted for him. He turns out to be like a charter schools guy too,
But so there's definitely a movement afoot, and this is going to provide both inspiration for activists on the ground that they can do something like this. It's also going to cause the Democratic caucus to move to the left. And it leaves a vacuum in the leadership. And necessarily every time you knock off, and we were talking about this the other day, not in the context of this race, but I think this is really indicative of it. The baby boomers sucked up all the oxygen, if you will, all the potential, nutrients that it takes to grow a political leadership from folks in the generations that followed them. I don't think it's a coincidence that this is a 28-year-old who won, who is part of a generation that is literally larger than the largest generation since the baby boomers. And I think in addition to, and we mentioned this, I think, in the context of PAYGO, the Democratic leadership, and I've had positive things to say about Nancy Pelosi, but I think it's quite clear that the combination of always being a bubble when you're in leadership. There's a certain inevitability about that after a certain period of time. But also being older and having lessons formed from your formative years that are really outdated. The Democratic leadership is sclerotic. And anything that can sort of start to break that up a little bit. Because when they look for a replacement for Crowley, it's probably going to come from a younger generation. And just the idea that you're breaking that up, even if it's from someone who isn't necessarily from the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and I think it's possible that it could be. If they're smart, they will.
Or people who aren't Democrats and they're staging a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party.
Well, they're unlikely to get into the leadership of the Democratic Party.
You never know.
Well, okay. I mean, I don't know how that works out, but I'm saying people in Congress who are Democrats are going to try and get into leadership to fill that void. I mean, this is just the reality of it. Hopefully, it starts to break that up, because my concern is not just even issue sets. I think there's a real problem with just sort of being able to do politics in a sort of just the mechanics of it. Chuck Schumer has shown himself to be incredibly ineffectual in bringing about outcomes that I think are uncontroversial across the spectrum of ideologies in the Democratic Party. And that's the worst case scenario. I mean, at the very least, you want a partisan to be able to bring about partisan outcomes.